I want to thank Michael and Estelle Stein for sponsoring this parenting series. I want to thank my dear friend, Chesky Pivavaz, for being in the control room, for volunteering to help us out, and Dr. Aviva Goldstein of Israel for helping with the research and a lot of other components of this. Good evening again and welcome. I call this a deep dive into parenting. It's something I haven't done. It's only the second time that I've done it in 23 years of giving parenting classes. And I'm really excited to be doing it again. And the big idea is that rather typically, you know, if I go lecture somewhere, I go to a community, spend the Shabbos there, do a few speeches over a few weekdays. But, you know, everybody goes their own way, and you really don't get a time to develop a common language. And what I really would encourage you all to do, again, I thank so many of you for coming and participating. And the big idea is to really take the time to study this, to learn, go home and read about it. Think about what we're talking about. And my greatest nachas that you could give me if we meet each other one day is you just say, you know, Rabbi Horowitz, you really got me thinking, and you gave me the tools to do this on my own. That's really what I'm hoping to do. That's the purpose of this entire series. So we have the luxury of going through theory, and then why adolescents act the way they do, to deeply understand it, then to go on to some practical examples, then go on to specialty items like technology and faith, religion. What do you do if your kid hits a pothole? So all of that we'll get to in sessions 3 through 6. What I really would like to do now tonight is to walk you through an understanding of adolescence. We're going to be doing some Torah Hashkafa, Jewish theology on adolescence and how that plays into effect, and a lot of clinical research to help walk through this. Okay, so I'm going to be working my way through this presentation. Just one more time, Chesky, everybody sees my screen?
Rabbi Horowitz, you look beautiful.
Thank you very much. Remind me to get you a pair of glasses. Okay, so the title of the talk is Mentor, Supervisor, or Both. And what I really wanted to encourage you to think about as we go through this process is, which of these roles do you want to play? And they're very different from each other. And as we're going to discuss later, they have different shelf lives. Your children there are distinct phases that are normal and natural and bring challenges because of the way that it's constructed. How would you like to guide your children into adulthood, guiding your teens and tweens into adulthood? And we're going to talk a lot about that, what you can do to help that. And I'll tell you a little secret. I'd love to get you all into doing more of the mentoring thing. And of course, I'll try to give you the tools. So we're going to start with understanding the transitional phases. And we have a rule that with knowledge comes power. And we'll get to it soon. Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, Ani bina li gevura, bi malachim yimleichu, that I have wisdom, with wisdom comes strength. So like I said, we're going to be talking about Torah theories of adolescence, developmental theories of adolescence, how this knowledge can empower you. And I really encourage you, ask questions, reflect, internalize. We're having some challenges with the chat. I initially had intended that we after the presentation, which will be between 30 and 40 minutes, we should have the ability for you to pose questions via chat. And then hopefully I'll be able to respond in real time. We'll see if we can get those technical difficulties settled, but even if not, hopefully we'll carry it on to the next time. Now, Stephen Covey, in his classic book, The 7 Habits of Successful People, so he wrote a lot of different 7 habits. One of the habits is habit 2, and he says, begin with the end in mind. And it's almost, he gives the analogy of shooting an arrow into the wall and then drawing a bullseye around it. Think of what your goal is and then sort of, retrofit what you're doing into that. And what I'm going to do, because we're going to be doing so much theory tonight, I think it's really important that you at least start with practice and begin with the end in mind. We'll examine these 4 scenarios, something that comes across my desk or phone or whatever all the time. Scenario number 1: my son doesn't want to go to shul with me any longer. Scenario number 2: everything's a negotiation now. It used to be whatever I said went. Now all of a sudden, obviously, the backstory here is going to be, now that he or she became a teenager, everything's, that's where this fits into our discussion. Such contradiction. Scenario 3: it just makes no sense to me. My kid volunteers. This is a real thing that I've heard from many people, different variations of this. My child will be the first one to volunteer to help straighten out the shul after davening, to help an elderly person with their groceries. They volunteer a whole entire summer to work in Camp Hask with developmentally disabled kids. And at the same time, they seem so selfish. It drives me crazy. And that is, as we say in the yeshiva world, das is gufa. That's exactly what adolescence is all about. Again, we'll have plenty of time to discuss this. In scenario 4, we were very close, and she was very affectionate. Now she's distant, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's random affection. I feel like I'm on a roller coaster all the time. The most common manifestation of scenario 4, this is usually what it sounds like. All Friday, I was begging my daughter to come, mom speaking, I was begging my daughter to help with the packages and help in the kitchen, and she's busy and texting and talking and whatever. And I was furious. I didn't say anything all day because I read the right parenting books, and I know I'm not supposed to unload on her when I'm nervous. And Friday night after the meal, we're sitting on the couch, and she snuggles up and says, "Hi, Ma." And I say, like, where are you all day? So again, the thing is something that does come often, but let's get to this. And before we end tonight, I'm going to encourage you to take the knowledge that you learned tonight and try to apply it and see if you have a different understanding, perhaps, of how it's been working until now. Okay? And this is an analogy that I give about understanding things, as they happen. This is my own analogy. This isn't research. This is just Yankee. But just imagine that all of us grew up in advanced countries where we're used to technology and electricity. And if we do something foolish like this, if we take a shower or wash our hands, if you follow Dr. Fauci and you're washing your hands for 20 seconds, and you plug in any sort of appliance, it's very likely that you get a shock because the water conducts electricity and you get a buzz. Now, here's the Yankee part of this. Imagine if you had someone at home that came from a third world country. Okay, someone was with you and they never saw electricity in their life. Okay, now that person sits down and does the same thing you did an hour later. You both had the same shock. You both had the same discomfort. You know what the difference is? You understood it, and he didn't. You understood exactly what was going on. So therefore, you had a certain comfort level. You said, okay, that was a silly thing. I should have wiped my hands, and that's it. Now, the fellow who doesn't know anything about electricity is going to think to himself, is God striking me? Did I do something wrong? Maybe, 9:45 every Tuesday night, I'm going to get zapped from now on. Is it anytime I take a shower here? So again, you're experiencing the same pain. You're experiencing the same phenomenon. The difference is that you know the backstory. And it makes all the difference in the world, just as it would in this case. And what I'd love to help you with is give you the tools to understand why let's get back to this one, why these 4 things happen. And again, you might be very hurt that your child isn't going to shul. You might be annoyed that they're negotiating with you. You might be flustered that they're, frustrated that there are contradictions. And you might be hurt that your daughter all of a sudden doesn't want to have anything to do with you most of the time. but at least you'll understand it. You say, yep, that's an electric shock. It happens. So this is what it's all about, okay? These are actually two, I wrote a parenting column in the Jewish Press for about 3 years, a weekly column. And this is actually a question a live question that I got. I hope you'll find it entertaining when I show you my response in light of our discussion with all of this. But this is a question, should I, is it put pressure? The kid doesn't want, child doesn't want to daven with my son doesn't want to daven with the father anymore. Should I change my shul? By the way, this person, Gedalia, I actually called him, I emailed him, we spoke on the phone, and what he said was that his son came home and who loved going to shul with him. Notice a pattern, folks? And he came home and he said, Dad, I don't like davening in the shul in the synagogue. The davening is too long. The prayers take too long. He said, nobody talks. There's no conversing. It's a serious place. And the kiddush, they're like a snack or a meal after the davening, is lousy in this shul. There's another shul that starts later. Chesky, I'm glad you're laughing. Everybody talks, and there's plenty of chatting going on. That's my kind of place. So he gave his father a litany of all the things that that the best practices of this other shul, and the father was devastated. And naturally, you go through, again, if you're from a third world country, if you don't know anything about adolescent development, you say to yourself things like, remember we but we spoke about this fellow who said, he thought he's going to get zapped every Tuesday night, or he thought that every time he takes a shower or whatever it is. You start saying to yourself, let me check the mezuzahs on my house. I don't know what happened, or what did I do wrong all these years? I wanted to get my children a love for davening, and all of a sudden now they don't want to come anymore. What school am I sending him to? We shouldn't have moved to this neighborhood. And hopefully by the time next week, the next session on Thursday rolls around, you'll just say, okay, it's adolescence. Okay. And this is another, I picked those 4 scenarios. They're just common scenarios. I'm not going to read things that are here, but go have a look, please. Okay, so that's the negotiating thing. Is this normal? And the parent's asking, is the parent themselves, parents are asking the questions that the guy in the shower says, is this normal? Is this a normal thing for children to start negotiating all of a sudden? Is it disrespectful to be challenging? Neither of us did this to our parents. By the way, parenthetically, I don't believe all of that sometimes, but maybe some other day. Just so you know, folks, when fathers would complain to me that their children aren't davening properly, when I was in a little bit of a frisky mood, I would ask the father, I say, well, when did you start davening? How old's your son? My son's 12, and he comes in, he doesn't daven, it's terrible. And I say, well, when did you start davening? You see, when I was 8, I sat next to my father the whole time. So not always, sometimes I would ask the father for his phone number, for his dad's phone number. I promise you, I call the father and say, tell me, when did your son start davening? Yeah, I don't know, about 15, okay. So some of that might be selective memory, but do you have any practical suggestions? And again, that's just another one of the 4 that just come along. This is going to be on YouTube afterwards, so you're welcome to look it up. This is an imaginary letter that I wrote following in one of the columns I wrote about adolescence, and I wrote about this a fictional letter, but comprised of a lot of things that go on. A kid writing to a daughter writing to her parents. She said, how would you feel if we moved? I'm not going to read all the details, but how would you feel if you knew in 2 years we had to move to another country or another state, and you didn't know where we're going to be, what you're going to do for a living, if you're going to have friends, if all it is? She says, well, that's the way I feel. And I'm under stress, and I'm asking all these questions. Will I get into a high school, a seminary? Will I marry? Will I have friends? Will I be able to, what's my marriage going to look like? What are my kids going to look like? Every one of these questions is a no. And so developmentally, 7-year-olds typically don't think about this. Adolescence is a normal time when people start disengaging from home and starting their own life. So developmentally, that checklist on the bottom is a very normal thing for kids to think about. In fact, I would propose to you that if you had a 17-year-old kid who wasn't asking these questions, you'd be calling someone like me and say, my kid has no goals, what's going on? But that brings stress. So one of the things that it's helpful to understand as we do this deep dive into adolescence is to understand that these phases, tweens, in a much smaller way, and then teenagers are a normal developmental phase where they're transitioning. That transition brings stress. Now, if I needed a favor, Chesky, my dear friend Chesky, who's running the control, I don't need you now, Chesky. I'm just using you as an example, Chesky. Thank you. If I had a favor from Chesky and I said, how could we figure out to make this chat work? It's not working. I really need your attention. Or I needed a favor from him. I said, I'm doing these 6 classes. Would you be kind enough? Imagine if I stopped in the middle of this line here. Okay, Chesky's got his shoes in his hand and he's shoveling around the buckets. And now Chesky's going on vacation. Chesky's laughing. Thank you, Chesky. So Chesky loves his home. He loves where he's going on vacation. This is not a good time to talk to him. And I propose to you that if I called Chesky, hopefully Chesky would say, gotta go, and hang up on me. Or what would you say, Chesky? Now you can unmute yourself. What would you say, Chesky? Go ahead.
Anything for you, Rabbi Horowitz.
Well, now you see why we get along. Thank you, Chesky. But we really know what he would say. He would not be in a mood to discuss things. So again, another component of the developmental phase that causes stress. And you're going to hear this from me a lot over the next little while. A pasuk in Mishlei, the wisest of all men, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, Ani Bina, I am wisdom, speaking metaphorically, Li Gevura. With wisdom comes power. With understanding electricity, you know what to do when you get a shock. When you understand, I'm sitting here on my back porch, Baruch Hashem, in Monsey. This is just to show support for mask wearing. So, but we're very socially isolated here, Baruch Hashem. It's nice and quiet. Our back door, our porch door, stops halfway on the track. It doesn't open as soon as it gets hot. Now, we went to science class. We know it expands, right? So the metal expands and the door becomes too tight. Again, it's happened many years, but if you say it's just 80 degrees, not a door, what, the door belongs to a union? Okay, so if you have Bina, right, you say, boy, what kind of union? They don't do opening anymore when it gets too hot. I have to bring them a glass of water. But once you understand this, it is, again, this is something you're really going to hear from me again and again. It's not only about problem solving. I want to empower you, and that requires self-confidence. You parent so much better when you feel like you're in control. And there's nothing that takes control away from you, not knowing what's flying, not understanding what's going on around you. In fact, Belina, the next week, I'm going to show you some research that shows how it's actually many studies that show that parents that feel self-confident and have wisdom are much able to parent better. Think of the best teacher you had in school, okay? Think of that best, he or she. You walked into that room, you got that feeling right away that you're not rolling he or she, right? That person is in control. Now, they may have been frightened, but they exude that sense of self-confidence. We tend to lose our temper and we tend to lash out when we don't feel that we have the tools to be able to do this difficult task. So that's what this is about, Bina and Gevura. Just for a moment, think about this on your own. Positive experience from adolescence. Feel free to have a look at it later and think about it. A negative memory from your adolescence, you know, you know, think practically about one thing that gives you confidence about being able to raise your children. Just so you know why this is effective, I'll tell you an incredible lesson that I learned. I had this sort of questionnaire. We were in a principal's program in Eretz Yisrael for Torah Masara in the late 90s. And someone came around and asked us to share our experiences of what the most pleasant memory we had of our elementary school. Parenthetically, they did a study in Israel. We were in Israel for the classes a few months before, and they discovered that 80% of people, when they said, tell me something from school, said something negative, which, boy, did that make an impression on me as a principal. And the thing that I remembered, it was the weirdest thing because I hadn't thought about it literally since school. I remember a teacher commenting on my shirt. I promise you, I have no idea how that random thought came to my head. I remember what shirt I was wearing. I remember where I was standing in the hallway. I was in 6th grade. And that's the first thing that came to mind because the teacher reached out to me as a person and it made an impact on me. And then I decided that when I get back to yeshiva, when I was starting in the school at the time, I'm going to stand outside and greet the Talmidim and comment on their clothing. So, you know, I'm encouraging you to think back and be reflective on your own parenting and think about what really worked with you, what really didn't work. And surprisingly, research shows, and we know this, that sometimes we tend to perpetuate this if we were raised in, let's say, in an authoritarian way, in a harsh way. Sometimes, unfortunately, if we don't get intervention, we wind up sometimes doing it to our children, even though we don't want to. So let's talk about the 3 areas of change. And again, I encourage you, like I said, go back and watch it on YouTube. Everything here is referenced that are studies or research. Study this and dive more deeply into this. So there's biological and physical, right? That as the body develops, puberty appears, their appearances change. Many times, you know, the bodies honestly look a little bit distorted at the beginning almost, that one part like seems to grow before the other, and it just makes them look, feel very awkward, which obviously adds to their stress and what the things we see. Intellectual and cognitive, about thinking, brain structure. We're gonna dive deep into one component of this soon. And social emotional, how they feel, their feelings, how they view themselves, how they view their friendships, love, affection, relationships, all of it, peer groups. All of this relates to, these are 3 areas of change that we know people go, that research shows that they go through. And if you stop and think about it, and you may not be thinking about it, why should you? That's what this class is about. Looking into this and thinking of all the moving parts that are going on. So biologically, okay, maturity, again, typically precedes psychosocial maturity. How characteristics and environment influence the changes that take place has a lot to do with the place where they are, the people that are around them affect this, and it's these things go over the course of time. And neurologically, there are changes, and as time marches on, we're learning more and more about the body, the human body, and again, have a look at this. I'm going to talk for a moment about the prefrontal cortex, which is really the brakes, so to speak, in our bodies. Now, you know, 200 years ago, the thinking was that everybody had a brain and brains work. Now we know that there are different parts of the brain and they affect different parts. One of the things that research clearly indicates is, look at this last sentence, I'll read. Changes are taking place in the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functions. That means your brakes. You know, decision-making, organization, impulse control, and planning for the future, long-term planning. Research clearly indicates that this part is not developed in 13-year-olds, and it comes over the course of time. And the changes, again, bottom of the sources, if you want to look any of this up, imagine how that affects how they're going to behave. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to give them a pass on poor behavior, but let's go back to the guy in the shower, coming out and getting an electric shock. Wouldn't it make a difference if you understood that this is a challenge for them? I'll tell you more than that. Wouldn't it be helpful to your children if you read up on this? Imagine if you took, let's say, if my Talmud Shia here, how you doing, Shia? I have some of my old students on. Nice to see you, Josh. Imagine if you sat down with your children and you said, you know, you have a 13 or 15-year-old. I can almost guarantee you they know something's off and they find themselves doing bizarre things that they can't explain, that they're getting in trouble from. And when you ask them, what were you thinking? What do they say? I wasn't, right? Or I don't know what I was thinking. They might not know. Research would say that their executive dysfunction, the decision making, is not fully developed. So again, I believe that it would be helpful, and I have found it helpful when I sat down with Talmidim of mine. This was my sweet spot. I taught 13 and 14-year-olds for 15 years as an 8th grade Rebbe, and then I was a Manal of the yeshiva, but I've been dealing with adolescents all my life. My wife of 40 years, Baruch Hashem, will say that I'm still an adolescent, but that's my space. This is how I've learned. You know something, when I was teaching, I found very quickly that none of my Talmidim were interested in my mortgage payments. Okay, and I had to learn to think like them if I wanted to be able to explain the Gemara to them or interact with them. So this is a very, very big deal, and I'm going to take a deep dive into this to illustrate how real it is, and again, to study this, encouraging you to keep diving into this and learn about these things. So this fellow's name, this gentleman's name with a closed left eye, his name is Phineas Gage. He worked on the railroad. And as you can see from this picture of the skull on the page, he had an absolutely horrible accident. They were working on the railroad. They used to clear, land and use explosives. And an accident happened, and that spike literally went right through his head like that. He survived, but he started changing. And if you read this, again, look how I underlined for you some, you shouldn't need to do all of it. Survival of an accident, I'm destroying much of his left brain's left front lobe, which we just said is the executive function. That frontal lobe that the children are having, that is not fully developed in adolescence, that frontal lobe was very badly damaged. And this, by the way, was one of the triggers that got doctors thinking about different parts of the brain, because they saw that when people from terrible accidents, if different parts of the brain today, they wire and they can see actually, which parts of your brain get hot and where the activity is. So they can actually do that. You smell something, one part of your brain lights up, you see something. But here, it was much more crude, of course. But what happened is, you look at this here, you see, they found out that he's no longer Gage, meaning he changed his personality. The first case to suggest the brain's role in determining personality. Now this, I God forbid, I would never want to smile at someone's, God forbid, misfortune, even if he passed away. But if you look here, pre-accident, Gage was hardworking, responsible, a great favorite with the men. He was the most efficient and capable foreman. Now, look at the next paragraph. The equilibrium or balance between his intellectual facilities and his animal propensities seems to have been destroyed. This is what people said about him. He's fit for, folks, anybody have teenagers at home? Read this. Get some comfort here. He's fitful, irreverent, means disrespectful. Indulging, he speaks filthy language, which he never did before. No respect for his fellows, impatient, restrained. He wasn't capable of planning. He was a child in his intellectual capacity and had the passions of a strong man. Previous to his injury, he had a great balanced mind. So basically, they said, in a nutshell, he was no longer Gage. Now, as I said, this brought about a change in the way we think about brain activity. But I think it certainly would help us understand that we have teenagers at home who have the deficiency that Phineas did, that his frontal lobe wasn't working. So again, I want to make it clear, not excusing poor behavior. and we'll get to that soon. But understand that this is the way it rolls, and it's all connected. Okay, the hormones. Again, I'm not going to go through a logic and faith, which we're going to be talking about. You know, our children go through this phase when they get bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah, and inside out. Again, have a read. I'm leaving the slides here. I'm going to stop. So, you know, you're reviewing them. I don't want to take a deep dive into these details, but early adolescence puberty is the biggest thing that happens where their bodies change. 14 to 17, increased importance of peers, which really helps explain a lot, you know, why kids, if faced with a choice between parents and friends at this stage in life, they tend to worry about their friendships in a great way. And then they transition to adulthood later. Growth spurts, early adolescents have concrete thinking, and the egocentric, later on, they start exploring, they have a need for privacy. I just added this page of Gemara. This is early adolescence, 10 through 13. The average boy in yeshiva in 4th grade is getting dismissed at 4 o'clock or 4:30 with the younger kids. Now, all of a sudden, during this age, I just added this on. They're learning Gemara, which is complicated text in a foreign language with no punctuation. And I'm going to be talking about that in session 6. Their day usually gets about 2 hours longer. They go to Minyan in the morning and they stay for later general studies in the afternoon. And the research shows how much sleep they need. Again, this is another factor to consider as you're thinking about adolescence and all of this. And this is middle adolescence, the increasing arguments with parents, romantic relationships, frontal lobes, you see, they're still not completely balanced in that. And then you have late adolescence. Again, if you look on the bottom, there's sources here. I really encourage you to read up on this and think deeply about these areas, middle adolescence, early adolescence, but basically in the big picture to understand that it's a transitional phase. It's a phase that makes them very uncomfortable because thankfully they're starting to get more responsible and ask questions to which they don't have answers, and their bodies are not developed. And I'm just going to take a little bit of time to go through some hashkafa, some Torah thought on this. And I found this absolutely fascinating. This one component at the bottom of Chayiv B'dinei Adam and Patur B'dinei Shemayim. Get to that in a moment. But I would like to suggest, and this will speak eventually, we'll talk about this mentor and supervisor thing. With every fiber in my body, I believe that Hashem gave us free choice. Why did Hashem give us free choice? Forget adolescence for a moment. God gave us free choice. Now we believe that this schar v'einish, this reward and punishment, but you don't get tasered if you do if you immediately, if you sin, you do something wrong, you don't get zapped right away. Hashem created the world that gave us the luxury or to be able to not listen. What's that all about? Why is that so? What's the value in being able to do this? And I absolutely believe that the reason is because we learn from our mistakes. That's just the way it is. You know, you take an umbrella out when you get sick. Not necessarily. Your mothers are supposed to tell you to take an umbrella, put on a sweater. And all mothers should keep doing that. That's what we do. But we learn more from a mistake than anything else. You make a bad investment, you risk the investment and you lose money. That's just the way we are. And Hashem created, there are psukim to support this, not for now, perhaps later, but the notion of going through learning from our mistakes. I'm 60 years old, folks, and you try. It's a lifelong effort to try to improve your midos. I had a terrible temper as a kid. Work in progress. I stuttered as a kid. I went for speech therapy. So we learn from our mistakes and we grow. I propose to you that adolescence is a time that children are making mistakes while they're in our home. I absolutely believe this. I can quote you some sources to support it, but I absolutely believe that this adolescent phase is a time when we should be mentoring our children and helping them to understand their mistakes, to learn from them, to discuss them. And what I wrote about mentor and supervisor is actually very similar. I wrote here planting and building. We're going to be talking about this more next week. It is my absolute #1 recommendation for a parenting book, folks. If you're interested, I don't get a cut on this. My book's actually published with Art Scroll. This is a Feldheim book. So it's called Zriya Ubinyan. Can you see it? It's backwards. It's a very thin volume. You could read it in an hour, but I encourage you to study it for a month at least. And I'm going to talk about it briefly today, a little bit more next week, and then as we get into some of the issues, we roll up our sleeves in sessions 3 through 6 and go through all the messy stuff of parenting and you know, abusing substances and you know, technology, everything. We'll talk about this more. But Rav Wolbe basically says, it's written by Rav Shlomo Wolbe Zatzal. I had the schus to one of the foremost thinkers of our previous generation. I had the great merit, the schus, to spend real time with him in Eretz Yisrael. And he has a philosophy as follows. I'm going to give you just, again, a thumbnail. Rav Wolbe says that there are 2 types of growth. There's building and there's planting. Okay, and he uses many psukim to support this. But basically, Rav Wolbe explains as follows: that there's a building which is an inorganic form of growth. It's easier, it takes less time than planting, and it's less messy. You just get a bunch of bricks, you line them up, that's it. The bricks don't move around, they don't talk back to you. You know, they don't need to be watered or pruned, they're just there. And planting is messier. It takes more time. It requires effort. You have to constantly look and see that things are in order. You have to weed. You can't forget about it for a day, whereas building just is. And Rav Wolbe explains that when we are authoritarian with children, we say, look, we're the parents, you got to listen to us. And Rav Wolbe says, you got to do some of that too. There's no question that, you know, we're not only mentors to our children. I believe we should be both. But Rav Wolbe explains that building is important, to say, I'm a parent and these are the rules that we have at home. But don't delude yourself, Rav Wolbe says, into thinking that it's going to last longer than your power. So as long as you're bigger and stronger and make rules, I don't mean stronger to hurt them, chas v'shalom. I mean, you know, you're bigger, you're strong, you know, you have more power than they do. So they have no choice really but to listen. But you're not affecting long-term change. That's Rav Wolbe's idea, that planting takes time and it's messy and you have to watch it and think about what you're doing. It's much easier to ban things. But when you get into this messy stuff called parenting, you eventually have a vineyard, you have a fruit tree that continues to give peiros, that the lessons that you impart to the kids stay beyond the time that you've given them. And that's Rav Wolbe's analogy. When you need to do building things, you need to tell your kids stuff, that's fine, do it. Don't think that's long-term. Don't delude yourself into thinking that this is a long-term exercise. And I'm, you know, closing out, noticing this thing, you know, honestly, I found that not all yeshivas teach this to kids for obvious reasons. But we have our Chazal tell us, our Chachamim tell us, that from bar or bas mitzvah until age 20, people are, like I wrote look at the last slide on the bottom, chayev b'dinei adam, they're responsible if they damage someone else, the poter b'dinei shemayim. So if they key somebody's car, if they break a window, they have to pay for it. And in the time of the Gemara, they would actually be forced to work till they would work for an employer whose wages would go to pay for that. But if they don't keep Shabbos, if they do something that's only with God, Hashem says, you're putter, I don't want you to do it, but you won't get a punishment until you're 20 years old. Now you see, now you know why they don't always teach this. but think about that. What's that all about? Isn't it incredible that with all exactly those years, the adolescent years, I think I wasn't there when these rules were made up, but I imagine that what Hashem is saying, that look, you're big guys, you're 16-year-old kids, you're stronger than your parents. I can't let you go around destroying things. So if you harm anybody else, tough luck, you have to pay for it. But I understand. And I wrote, again, I'll leave it here for a minute, you can look it over, but it struck me that this time is a time of this adolescent transition that Hashem gave young men and women whose frontal lobes are not developed the ability to get a waiver on things that don't harm other people. That's only with Hashem. Hashem says, I understand. I created you like this. You're a work in progress. So back to the Ani Bina Li Gvura. This is your homework for tonight, folks. Not your homework, your takeaway. What I'd like you to do is look at these 4 scenarios that we started with. Look at these 4 scenarios. Again, hopefully this will be up on YouTube within an hour or two. Look at these 4 scenarios. Again, not coming to shul. Everything's an argument. I can't figure them out. My daughter is affectionate and suddenly not affectionate. And how has this Bina, the knowledge that we've been talking about, has it given you any more strength? So here are the takeaway questions. Do you feel more empowered knowing what you know? You have a 15-year-old at home, you have a 10-year-old at home, and you're starting to notice things that worry you. You're starting to notice things that puzzle you. You pick, any one of these 4 scenarios or hundreds of others that worry you and bother you, and rightfully so. You're good parents. You want to do right by your kids. Do you feel more empowered knowing these? Knowing what we've been talking about so far about development and the stages and the phases in life. And how would you guide parents facing any of those 4 scenarios? Here's an out-of-the-box thought. How would a supervisor deal with this? Okay? The kid doesn't want to go to shul. A supervisor says, got it. Well, I'll leave it for you. How would a supervisor who's interested in a short-term deal with it, and how would a mentor deal with it? How would a mentor deal with any one of those 4 issues? Would it be in a different way? And the reason that I like this format is I hope that you'll spend some time over the next 47 hours till we meet again, really thinking, reflecting, look at your children. One of the reasons I got thinking of this was because of COVID. I said, I finally have a chance to get many parents. I am really glad to see that a lot of you are together as couples or parents. And I shout out to all the single parents and parents of blended families that I especially invited to join us. My mother was a single mom for 2 years. My parents blended families long before it was cool. And I tip my hat to all of you. But think about this as you go through your day. Try to step back and try to be like a fly on the wall and watch your teenager, watch your tween, watch them talk, interact, and just try to filter through. Maybe if it helps you, take a 1-pager and write a few things that encapsulate what we talked about. Maybe just, take pictures of these screens and scroll through them when you have a few minutes. And just, this is what I'd love for you to do. And this is why I like this format. So you have the time to incorporate this before we get to the next step. Next week, we're going to roll up our sleeves. I'm going to go through, the first thing I'm going to do next week is I'm going to go through all 4 scenarios and give answers based on what we did. We're going to dive more deeply into Rav Wolbe's theory. We'll do some more research. And then, like I said, in sessions 3 through 6, we're going to start really getting into stuff. We're going to roll up our sleeves and get it. So that's the takeaway question. Again, do you feel more empowered? How would you advise a parent with one of those How would a supervisor act? Again, a supervisor is busy worrying about what's happening today. Okay, I have a team of people. I want everybody there. What would a short-term response be, and what would a long-term response be to those? And finally, here's the kicker. Okay, bottom of the page. At what age does your role as supervisor fade? Okay, at what age in your child's life does that start fading? And you say, you know, I'm not the supervisor anymore. And at what age does your role as a mentor fade? Think about that. Is that something that's a longer term thing than a supervisor? Okay. Chesky, were we able to resolve the chat?
I did some research. I know that you're very research-based, Rabbi Horowitz.
Especially when somebody else is doing it.
So, you know, I'll text you. At this point, I don't think I can do anything from my end. I think hopefully by next time we have this, we could figure it out.
I really initially intended, I'm going to try to get it next week. I saw somebody, it says that waved a hand. Does that mean you have a question? I see, I wanted, like, presentation is over. I wanted to leave time to ask some questions. I'll tell you what, if there's, Chesky, is there something, you just waved a hand, Chesky?
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, give you a shout out.
Okay, so if anybody has a question, I'll be glad to unmute you. If anybody wants to ask a question, if you're okay with everybody hearing you, just put up a hand. Let's try it out. I've never done this before. Worst comes to worst, I won't do a good job. That's okay, you'll fire me. So go ahead, folks. If anybody wants to ask a question based on what we talked about, please, by all means, pop a hand up and I'll unmute you. How does that sound? Or Chesky will unmute you.
So, Rabbi Horowitz, so I have a good idea. Maybe unshare your screen now so you can see everybody.
Unshare my screen. Yes, thank you. You are the best, Chesky. Okay, good.
And I'm going
to go to gallery view.
So now you're on gallery view.
Okay,
So,
a lot of folks. Okay,
yeah.
I see more of you. Anybody? Hand? Come on, let's go. Anybody? I'll be delighted to take any question you have. The only thing is I ask you, if you can, pose it in a way that's more general so people can benefit. In other words,
we have Chani Bruder.
Go ahead. Can you unmute her? Go ahead, Chani.
Hi. I was just wondering, is it possible?
I'm sorry, Chesky. How do I get to see Chani? What do I do? Click?
I have my video off.
Oh, good for you. Go ahead. Yes.
I was just wondering, is it possible to send a link with the slides, like in an email?
Let me think about it. I have everybody's email. I sent an email today before the session. Let me see what I can do with it. I'll have to think about it if I want to share all of it like in that format, but I'll certainly think I would like to do it. Let me think about it a little bit. Okay,
I'll
send an email tomorrow with the YouTube clip and maybe some other reading. So thank you for asking.
Thank you very much.
Sure, my pleasure. Hope you found it helpful. Go. Anybody else?
Next we have Aviva Minster.
Go ahead, Aviva.
Hi. Okay. So I guess when we're talking about kids who have an underdeveloped cerebral frontal cortex, and they're not making great decisions, right? They have poor impulse control. They want greater independence, but then they're not capable of making these choices. I guess I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to figure out how do you balance, being, I guess, the short term and the long term. Okay.
So I think
especially, I'll add to it, is just especially when you see them making decisions which are self-destructive.
Right. So I think the most important thing that a mentor would do, not a supervisor. Okay. Think about what a supervisor would do and what a mentor would do. Okay. Mm-hmm. which is the process that I want you to go throughout this series. So a supervisor would say, knock it off. I'm going to punish you. You just did this, right? And sometimes you have to do that. I think what a mentor would do, if you were talking to someone, coaching them, understand it yourself, which you do, explain it to your child, explain that I know this must be very difficult for you, and what strategy can we use if I see you doing something dangerous or harmful? Maybe you said, I'm just I think out of the box, so forgive me. Maybe you do a 1 to 10 system with your child, with that child, and and you give them a this. That means you're doing something that's an 8 out of 10. That's dangerous. Have some system with them where you're letting them know that they're doing something dangerous and how bad it is. Compliment them when they make a good decision. Tell them that you realize how hard it is. Look, I can't sit still. I'm 60 years old. Okay, I'm not embarrassed to say, school was just a miserable experience for me. And I'm not blaming anybody. I had it on this back porch. Somebody remind me, I'm going to send you a link to by the way, I have a YouTube channel called Yaakov Horowitz. Feel free to sign up for it because I put all my new things on it. I made a barbecue for about 20 Hasidic kids that were in a yeshiva for kids who weren't making it in school. And I hope this answers your question, Aviva. I told them during the barbecue, I'll send you the video of actually me talking to them. And I told them that I'm not saying I'm a successful adult, but every single thing that I was able to do, those qualities made me a terrible 8th grader. Okay, just give me 1 second. I have to take this personal call. I'm going to mute myself just for a minute, and I'll be right back with you, okay? What, they delayed it? 1 second, darling. Let me check. 1 second. You got a notification. Wait. I'm just upgrading, sweetheart. Yes, it's delayed. Whoa. What does it say? View reservation. 10:45. It doesn't say anything. Oh, I have to go to flight status. I'm sorry. 1 second. The flight 2 hours and okay. So yeah, it's leaving at 1 o'clock in the morning. But you're getting the now. One way to tell, you see, it says where the aircraft comes from. Yeah. So it says that it's in the air. That means you're okay. You usually check for that. And if it means if it's in the air, if you see that they're delayed further in the air, then you might want to take something else. Sweetheart, I'll be free in about a half hour. Okay. Okay. I love you. Bye bye. Bye bye. I didn't mute myself. Family first, folks. Okay, that's plain.
Okay, Rabbi Horowitz, can I interject?
So
can I interject for a second, though?
Please.
What if it's more? Again, you're talking about kids though who have it's a pattern of behavior. Okay, so we're not just addressing. Are we always saying it's like you're mentoring, you're teaching, you're
right.
Again, you're teaching again, you're teaching
right.
again. You feel like you're losing ground because.
So I would tell you, Aviva, that it's, you just have to hang in there, and not have to. I encourage you to hang in there. Sometimes it just takes time. My Rebbe Rav Tam Zatzal had such a beautiful thought. I mean, what a malach he was. He was just an amazing human being. What a mentor he was to us. I miss him very much. So, Rebbe once said that the Torah compares educators, which you are to your children, right? We're all educators in some way, to kachavim, to stars in the sky. Okay? So looking for it, not for now. So Rebbe said that what's the reference? What do the stars have to do with teachers? He didn't mean like, stars in Hollywood. I meant the stars in the heaven. So Rebbe said that a star, it tells us that a star is 6 light years away. Now, what does that mean? That the light, you go outside now, I leave my porch, and I see some stars. That means that light was given off years ago, 6 years ago, and it took time to get here. So Rebbe said, you're talking to children. Children are impulsive. Children are not always going to listen to you. Sometimes it'll take 6 years for them to remember what you said. That's what Rebbe said. He said, give your children good messages, lead a life that's good and with values. And don't be frustrated if the kids don't pick it up right away. Sometimes it just takes time. So I think you should try to encourage them to think about. I'll give you an example. There's something that I did in my yeshiva. When kids, and not all the time, but especially with kids that had real difficulty with this, I would ask the kids like this. They got into a quarrel, got into a fight. Tell me 2 things you could have done since this morning that would have avoided this. Okay? And right away they start, yeah, this guy's thought it's his fault. It's not. What could you have done? So your child does something wrong, try to get them to reflect a little bit. Ask them, is there anything you could have done to avoid this? Is there anything we could see if this happens again that I could tap you in a way and remind you to make a better choice? It's a process, Aviva. I wish I could tell you that, I'll give you a magic pill and it's going to go away. But keep doing what you're doing. Study yourself, explain to the children what's going on, and try to help them in smaller ways. Lecturing to them usually doesn't work. I said, the Vilna Gaon talks a lot about people's personality. What I told the kids on the porch is that this ability, I got up at an Aguda convention in 1996 in front of 4,000 people on a Sunday morning. I was 38 years old. And I started saying that, there's teens at risk and kids are being Machal Shabbos and that, whatever, we have to stop this. They had a bunch of Mayetzis members. Like, imagine that quality, which means I speak my truth. I don't care who's listening, right? Imagine that at 13, right? Or I published a safety book and a Gemara book, workbook, and I'm doing these classes and the people are whatever. So that energy and not caring what people say, not really great for a 13-year-old. So it is what it is. Hang in there. That this kid will probably help you out when you're older.
The truth is, I'm not even, when I say self-destructive, it's I'm being
harmful. I know you mean harmful.
And when I say harmful, I mean, let's talk about something benign like sleep, which is not
Right.
benign. So you have a kid who they don't really understand natural consequences. Then maybe they may have some self-awareness and they may understand, but the pattern's going to repeat and repeat and repeat.
So you try, I'd like to get to some other questions here, but
Yeah.
So what you try to do is you try to evaluate, are they able to function with less sleep? Maybe you let them, maybe you make it, in other words, you can do it performance-based. You can make your supervisor rules. So think about a way that ties it to performance. And you try to help them through it and give them strategies. They may not know how to go to sleep. If nobody has a question, then I'll finish one more thought on this. But if not, anybody else? Go. Esther, Aviva to be continued. Go ahead, Esther. Esther, are you there? Chesky? Esther, is your hand up? I thought I saw a hand up. You want to unmute yourself? Oh, I have to unmute you. I'm sorry. Go.
Oh, yeah, okay, now it's
Go ahead,
good.
Esther, please. We'll
Okay.
take up 2 more
What do
questions.
you do with,
If anybody wants to go, feel free to
Hello?
go in a couple of days. Otherwise, I'm glad.
Hello?
Go ahead, Esther, go.
okay, what do you do with a child who, turns into a geek?
Turns into
And, doesn't, a geek,
a geek?
a computer geek, yeah.
Oh, a geek,
Like he
yes.
he doesn't wake up and he doesn't do any of the, things that someone's supposed to do. He doesn't always put on tefillin because he's, and he's,
Middle of a game. Does he have
he's
those
just a
chairs?
genius at,
Does he have a gaming chair?
well,
Chairs, like you sit all day and then.
what they did is that they gave him a place to work.
What?
He's a genius in computers,
Right.
but he basically does it whenever he wants to. He has no schedule. He has no idea, and he doesn't care about.
How old is the child? How old?
He's 16, 17.
Oh, a teenager. You talking about now during COVID or generally speaking?
Oh, always since he's.
So,
15. He doesn't go to yeshiva. He doesn't do anything.
So
He
that's
just,
a little more complicated. That I probably could not answer in this forum because not only because of privacy issues, but I would need to know much, much more. Or better yet, you might want to evaluate if there really is something going on, or maybe that's who they are. One of the things, my first students, are 51 years old now. My first group of students are 51 now. Okay, I started teaching when I was 22. The kids were 13. Do the math. I'm 60. So I get to see people. I got a longitudinal study, remembering what they were like in my classroom, and now seeing them as adults. And I'm telling you, it's a drop dead riot. I had one kid in my class who, you know, the kids who were doodling, not all of them, of course, I have graphics companies now, you know, doing graphic design. And the kids who were banging on the desk, you know, are musically inclined. Not all of them, of course, but I had one kid who used to broadcast the classroom. And I could you imagine? He said, and Rebbe's walking up the hall right now. Come over to Yitzi. Yitzi picking up the Gemara. Yitzi's ignoring. He just started. He did this, and you know, whatever. I decided to tell him that if he whispers it and he does it in the back of the room, he's able to do it. Okay, that was my deal with him, and it was entertaining. The kids got a kick out of it. He said, as long as you don't disturb anybody. He literally would broadcast, not the entire time, but whenever he got this is what it would sound like. And Rebbe's walking up those. I see Rebbe's in the He wound up being a producer of a show before he was 40. Okay, so I would probably tell you.
Religious?
What?
Was he religious? Was he religious?
Yeah, he was. But by the way, we're doing religion in session 4. Look, what I'm saying is a person's nature is their nature. That doesn't mean you shouldn't. I would probably tell you to go for a consultation with a mental health professional and talk over and see what's the range is normal, what's might be a little, you know, compulsive behavior. Get some more tools. Not only wouldn't I do it here, but I'm really not the right person for this. If you're concerned,
Isn't there like besides the fact that they're not mature, isn't there isn't it normal to have like a feeling that for a teenager to have a feeling like I want to do something, I want to accomplish.
Yeah, you saw the research that says that late adolescence, which is where your child is starting to get into, that's when they should start thinking about it. You know, Baruch Hashem, our children grow up in comfort, and they're not lacking for food. You know, so 2 generations ago, the kids were hustling when they were 12. So that's Baruch Hashem. It's a little complicated. I would quickly encourage you and anybody out there who has something where you're worried if something is clinical, go for a consultation to a professional. Say what you're seeing, describe what you're seeing, and ask them if it's within the range of normal. One last one, and we'll call it a night, folks. Anybody else? Hand, go ahead. Yes.
You have to unmute her.
I did. There's a digital hand you're supposed to do, but it's okay. You can use your hand. Go right ahead, please.
Using a real hand?
Go for it.
Hi. I'm asking for a friend. Let's say.
I'll answer for a friend. Go ahead.
Let's say my friend has a teenager who's not interested in being modeled to. She wants nothing to do with any kind of conversation. She just She has no interest in being modeled to. She doesn't want to have any conversation. She just wants to do her own thing. And
what was the word you said? Modeled?
Modeled. She's not interested in being mentored to.
Oh, mentored. Okay. I didn't understand what you're saying. Okay. She's right. She just wants to be left alone.
She wants to be left alone. She happens to be living in the house. She prefers to be living somewhere else.
How old is your friend's child?
I'm pretty sure she's turning 14 on September 6th.
Okay. Look, if the child is functioning well, let them go. Don't be a supervisor. If they're functioning in school and that they have friendships, and I see your husband smiling, it must be something he's saying on behalf of your other friend, on your friend's husband.
It's not my friend's husband. It's my husband.
No, I mean, he's telling on his husband.
I'm laughing on behalf of the friend's husband.
Hey, that's what I meant. I said,
100%.
Look, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Some people have, like I said, you'll see over the course of time that people very often are products of who they are, and they have a nature, and you see it when they're 4 years old. I'm going to unmute Josh. Josh, you had it. 1 second. I have a Talmud here. Josh.
Yes.
You had a child in Dachinoam or Ruvain, whatever.
Right? 2 of them, Baruch Hashem.
And when I was around, I used to spend the most time, the first month of the year, I spent in kindergarten class more than any other class. You had a kid in kindergarten. Your child was in kindergarten when I was there, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I used to do magic shows. I used to read books to the kids, right? You remember?
Yeah, Rabbi Horowitz would always be, the greeting outside thing isn't the myth. Rabbi Horowitz would be outside greeting everybody, kids getting off the bus, all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. But one of the reasons that I would go there, who was I talking to? Yona's wife is?
Javi.
What?
Javi.
Javi speaking on behalf of Aviva. Okay, so one of the things that I would do, and the reason I spent the most time in kindergarten is because I wanted to get to know the kids. And I'm telling you that after a half hour, the first day, I could tell you who's not going to bring in his homework in 6th grade. Yeah, why are you laughing? I'm the only one.
Was it our kid?
I was just the one who didn't bring it in 8th grade, Rabbi Horowitz's class.
There you go. And you know what you watch for? You watch them unpack. And the kids who come in and they say, okay, here's my AM snack and my PM snack and my just in case snack and the galoshes that be lined up perfectly well, that kid's bringing in his homework. Now, if the teacher has a creative exercise and tells the kids to think out of the box, that child might not do that well because they're rule followers and they're organized. But if you want the homework in, you got it. And then you watch kids like me who walk in and just, you know homework's gonna be a problem. So if your child is independent, that is who they, your friend's child. Usually people are who they are. You see it almost at birth, literally, not literally at birth, 3-4 years old. You start seeing these tendencies. Supervisors tend to try to break that because they don't fit with the rules of everybody. And then I'm marching in line with everyone. I say bedtime is, bedtime is, with the bedtime, right? Bedtime is 8 o'clock. You're messing up my schedule. But I get up in the morning on time, but that's not bedtime, right? So you could do that. No one's stopping you. But you'll probably find out later in life that this child is going to go to sleep at 3 in the morning and get up for work the next day. So sometimes, one of our children had my nature, very oppositional. I try to channel it in good ways now, but I promise you, I used to go over to this child, my friend's neighbor's child. I would go over and say, let's say the kids in Yankee. I said, Yankee, don't clean up your room right now. I don't want you cleaning. No, that was our joke. If I wanted the child to do something, I would say, don't do it. So if the child doesn't want to be guided and is independent-minded, you can supervise, but you're just going to I think you'll get frustrated. And if you're mentoring, you'll look at the end product and say, is the kid doing what they have to do? Are they making good choices? Do they have good friends? Do they have good values? Then you're good. Not what you wanted to hear? Tell her. Okay, folks. Good night, everyone. I hope you found this helpful. Keep thinking good thoughts, and I'll see you in a couple of days. Chesky, thanks a million. Be well, everyone. Good night.